I welcome you all to this evening of the Right Circle. It is an initiative of the Prabha Khaitan Foundation in association with Ehsaas Women of Ajmer and Care. The hospitality partner is Hotel Pratap Mahal. Prabha Khaitan Foundation is a Kolkata-based non-profit trust established by late Dr. Prabha Khaitan back in the 1980s. Dr. Khaitan was an eminent literature, cultural and social activist who valued the heritage of Indian literature, art and culture. The foundation believes that literature, music, performing art, painting and other art forms are repositories of a society's collective memory. All creative expressions of art forms are platforms to connect to niche audiences, communicate ideas and create a cultural capital. For the foundation, culture is a kaleidoscope of language, music, literature, visual arts, dance, drama and oral traditions. It aligns with UNESCO's views that cultural development has the potential to promote sustainable development in marginalized sections of the society. Today, we have with us author Mr. Jagdeep Singh. Mr. Singh's first collection of poems, My Epitaph, which was published in 2020, received widespread critical acclaim. It was recognized by the prestigious Journal of Commonwealth Literature as one of the most interesting debut collections of Indo-English poetry in 2020-2021. He has recently published his second anthology, When Gods Don't Matter. It was released at the prestigious Jaipur Literature Festival 2026, where yours truly had the pleasure of being in conversation with him. He is currently working on a novella as well as reminiscences of his school, Mayo College, which celebrated 150 years of establishment recently. Ms. Malati Mathur will be in conversation with the author today. She was a professor of English, director, School of Humanities, and director, School of Foreign Languages in New Delhi. A fellow at the Institute of Advanced Studies, Rashtrapati Nivas, Shimla. She is a translator with Trikatha, Katha, British Council Awards for Translation, and a published poet invited to read her poetry online at the Chicago edition of the Jaipur Literature Festival. She's been on the jury of the FICCI Translation Awards. She has published widely on a variety of topics including humor and travel, and reviews books regularly with India Today, Indian Express, The Hindu, National Review, The Book Review, The Asian Age. Publications by her include Niti Sar Sangrah, translation of 250 verses from Bhartrihari's Niti Shakatam, Chanakya Niti, and Vidura Niti. Remembering Amma, translation of a Tamil novel, Reformatory, translation of a Punjabi novel, Affinities, volume of poetry, Merging Meridans, A.B. Hope's Poetic Vision, Literary Criticism, Ustad Ali Akbar Khan, The Jodhpur Years, which is a biography. A warm welcome to both of you. With that, I would request Malati to please begin.
Thank you, and very good evening. It's a pleasure to be here, especially to be in conversation with a writer whose first collection of poems, paradoxically, the epitaph is supposed to be the last thing that is written on him wherever you are resting, but that is his first collection. So I suppose, in a way, the title of his first collection will give you an insight into the kind of poetry that Mr. Singh writes. And I had not met him before. We had a very brief conversation over the phone when I was asked to do this publication. And even before I read any of his work, I could make out that here is a man who takes words seriously. because he called me at a time when I was not at home and I was not able to talk to him. And he said, so generally when I can call. And I said, can you call me in the evening around 6-ish? I did not say 6, I did not say 6:30 or 6:15. And lo and behold, he calls me at 5:58, which is 6-ish. So I immediately knew that he's someone who pays attention to words, and he's particular about the meaning and the import of those words. So I looked forward to reading his poetry collection, and let me tell you, I was quite relieved to see that it's a rather slim collection. Because I was already working on a couple of projects and I was wondering how I'd be able to wade through reams and reams of poetry. But the slimness of this volume belies the intensity of the emotion and the ideas that he expresses in these poems. Some of them are very, very short, just a few lines, but they encapsulate so much more. And there are so many poems where there is not just emotion, there is, of course, in most writings of poets, there is always an autobiographical element. But apart from that, there is worldliness, the having been there, done that, seen things, and the kind of impressions that he has gathered of the world and the people around him. All of that is reflected in what he writes. So it's a great pleasure to be here with you. And like he is fondly addressed as Jags by his friends and associates. So I think I can start this conversation with you. I don't know if this question has been asked you before. It may seem rather trite, but I noticed that you had a rather peripatetic journey, professional journey. You've been a journalist, you've been a teacher, you are a poet, of course, and you are heading a PR firm. So, what is it that prompted you to make this journey, and how has the journey been so far?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Malati, firstly for accepting to be a moderator in such a short time. Thank you very much. Before I begin, I would also like to welcome all of you for just coming on a working day afternoon and covering a bit of distance. Ladies and gentlemen, for me, coming to Ajmer is about coming for a pilgrimage. Not only because of the Dargah or the Pushkar, because it has no college. Each time I enter Ajmer, I get this feeling, and each time I enter the portals of Meo, it is something like, I've like achieved a great achievement again of going for a worship or something. So that's the feeling. And I've seen so many of the young boys here, and I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Suresh Mathur, my former English teacher. This poetry collection is dedicated to him. And not to forget thanking Prabha Khaitan Foundation, the Ehsaas Women of Ajmer, the hospitality partner, so it's a great afternoon, I think, to all of you to see you here. And yeah, so actually I've had, funnily enough, I was wanting to become a journalist. And there's one thing very funny happened to me, that I was joined now in the 4th standard, and I was always complaining to my parents that why did you send me to a boarding school at such a young age? And they said they were in the army and they were getting posted here and there, and each time they had to change the school. But when I passed out from Meo, I said, I told mom that wherever you are, I'm going to be there. So first time they were in Ranchi, so I did my first year from Xavier's Ranchi, and then they got posted to Kota, the government college quota did not really inspire me, so I joined Commerce College. So, I had all kinds of, I did commerce, I did journalism, I did English, I did history. And I would like to recall that thing again. I had said this earlier in the Stowe Club also, that the two teachers who really inspired me were Mr. Suresh Mathur, and I ended up doing Masters in English. And another was Mr. Y.P. Bhardwaj, who taught us history, and I ended up also doing Masters in History. And then I got an opportunity, thanks to Xavier's Jaipur. They hired me as an English teacher, but I kept telling them, if there's ever a chance I could teach history also, let me know. So, in between, the history teacher of Xavier's suddenly left, so there was a lull, and so for about a year I taught history also, which was amazing. And those 6-7 years of my life, the teaching literature and parting for history was the most memorable years of my life. So, like my journey with travel, I started a newspaper, which was taking, no English newspaper has actually survived in Jaipur. Times of India closed 2 times before it started for the 3rd time. And so I also started a newspaper by the name of Rajasthan Echo, which didn't take off. So meanwhile, alongside, I joined Xavier's. I was teaching school. But when I wound up my paper, I realized that just by teaching school, I wasn't really getting that, you need to do something more maybe. And so I got a break in RICO. And because they considered my 5 years of teaching of journalism, my newspaper as a thing, they wanted 5 years experience. So I joined the world of PR. PR is very interlinked to journalism, because we're dealing with journalists on a daily basis. And so and then I got a chance to go abroad as a motivational speaker and head of training in a retail company in Jakarta for 3 years. I was there for 3 years and I had to come back because of my personal reasons. And thereafter I started my PR firm. And in 11 years, I'm happy to say that it's the leading PR firm in Rajasthan today.
It's quite evident that you are a rolling stone that hasn't gathered any moss at all, because you seem to be reinventing yourself, no matter what profession or whatever field you dabble in. And maybe dabble is the wrong word, because you seem to be committed to what you do. So dabbling is a very light kind, very shallow kind of a word. So it's something that you dive in wholeheartedly, I think. And coming to this little collection of poetry, in your foreword, in your preface, you say that someone asked you, why is it that your poems are not light-hearted? Why are they so melancholic? But I did not find so much melancholy in the poems, because even in a poem, like when you're talking about the heart, you're talking about the medical procedure that's happening, and you say the heart has its reasons to break, to do a lot of things, but then it also has this capacity to spread sunshine, to make people happy, to spread love. And also there's another poem where you say, I wish I could be a peddler of love. I wish I could go around hawking love and affection and all the positivity that is to be found. So I did not really find it melancholic, but there was one strain that interested me greatly in the poetry, and that was how you do not sugarcoat your feelings. You do not use any euphemisms. You do not preach. That is something really wonderful to read. And you say something like, you should nurse a grudge. Would you like to read that out? Because I found that rather interesting. Do you want me to nurse the grudge on page 17?
It's true that I have not sugarcoated my feeling. If it is about nursing a grudge also, want to, and there are 3 or 4 poems like this, where there's one about, and so you get up at night and you realize that Buddha, like you get the wisdom that mere hatred is not enough, it's got to be vicious, it's got to be, so yeah, there are a few.
It's going to be vengeful, you see. Right?
So 33.
Yes.
Thus the grudge. Let them jostle with each other the grievances, and eventually one of it will stand out. Nurse it with patience. Let the grievance, now king-sized, metamorphose into a gargantuan grudge. Nurse it with patience. Now wait for the opportune moment to strike. Strike hard, with a vengeance. No quarters given, no quarters taken.
Could we go a little deeper into that word? Why nurse it right? Because we are constantly told that we need to forgive and forget, especially for our own mental health. And here you are, not only this one, but the other, when you're talking about your insomnia as well, where you are nursing a grudge, you are patiently letting hatred grow and saying that it has to be vicious. It can't just be half-hearted dislike of something or someone. So why is that something that you would recommend?
This is a very good question. I would like to answer it this way, that my poems are also cathartic, they are also therapeutic. If I have written them, I have let my feelings out. So if I have written Nurse a Grudge and now I should go about it, I think it helps me feel better, helps me feel lighter, and I feel a relief. So it is not that in real sense of the terms I am going to go wrong by the way.
Yeah, that's a relief. Because a lot of people, especially young, susceptible readers, might sort of want to follow that path.
Well, I was asked another question, what do you feel about the readers having the time? Frankly, I don't think I've written this poems with the readers in mind ever. So when I've written, it's come in when the book gets published, it does get to the readers. But, you might have novelists writing with the readers in mind, that I'm going to write this kind of a novel or such a short story. These poems, frankly, I never had the readers in mind. Now that you bring it up, yes, there could be a risk factor like this.
So what do you think when you're writing? You are not thinking of an audience, you are not thinking of the readership, but you're putting it down on paper. And like you said, it's cathartic. So is that why you write? Or is there any other significance to what you're doing?
No, there's not much of significance. And let me tell you, a poem will come when it will. You don't plan it or you don't sit down to write. कल सुबह 4 से 6 बजे मैं कविता लिखूंगा. Like Hemingway, for instance, could get up every morning 6 to 8 and write whatever he had to write for that day for his novel. If you are working on a thesis, if you're working on a prose, essay, article, you can plan to write. So, in a poem it will come, and it comes knocking on your door. I've written somewhere, it will come and knock on your door. So, a lot of my poems were written, there was a phase in my life when I was suffering from insomnia, and I could time it, I would wake up at 3 in the morning, and instead of tossing and turning in the bed or popping a sleeping pill or something, I would, there is always a seed. For a poem, there's a seed which enters you, and that seed then starts developing. So the time when I was awake in the dead of the night, I would imagine my poem, I would imagine even the punctuation marks. But I never got up to write it down. And when I got up in the morning later, eventually you fall asleep again, and then you get up. So whatever of it remained, I went and tried to write it if I still remember snatches of it. And later, once I've written a poem, I forget about it. I might put it in my drawer, it might be in my diary. But when I revise it again, each of my poems have been revised a minimum of 50 times. Even today, if you say, can you find one superfluous word or one superfluous punctuation mark in my poems, I don't think I can find it. They have been worked so. There's a poem in my last edition called The Holocaust Survivor. That was 7 stanzas long. Eventually, it became 2.5 stanzas. And my previous publisher, Writers Workshop, considered it my best poem and put it on its website. So when I write, I may not have readers in my mind, I may not have an audience in my mind, but surely writing helps me. And the best way I thought of handling my insomnia was to write a poem. And I'm not a very voracious, I would say, not a very prolific writer of poems. There are 5 years, 50 poems. I mean 5 poems or 10 poems in a year, which is nothing like you said. It's a very slim volume. So I write because nothing gives me, once my poem is complete, once I have revised it and seen it in its final form, I'm not scared of sharing it. I put it on my social media handles, and whether it's my story or it's Instagram, and I see the feedback also. Now please remember that there are pages on the writers. I've written a poem, for instance, on Jean-Paul Sartre, or I've written on Hemingway in my earlier edition. I've written on Sylvia Plath. I put it on their pages. Now the poem on Sylvia Plath of my first edition, I recently got a mail from, someone from Seattle in the USA, who's saying we are bringing out collection of Sylvia Plath poetry. Can we use your poem? So, and the feedback, I by mistake wrote in my Hemingway poem that he was married thrice. He was actually married 4 times. So there was so much of criticism. They are arguing with each other. I'm not even there. I just posted that poem. And there were 300 reactions to that poem. And they are fighting among themselves. One of them said he does not even know that he was married 4 times, written thrice. Another guy is writing to him, you are missing the import of the poem. You are touching children. So when I write my poems, I don't think I have the readers in mind, but it gives me a great sense of satisfaction to see a complete poem, even if it has negativity in its connotation. I get a sense of satisfaction.
Well, you were talking about the creation. So that was something that I wanted to ask you. Does a poem come spontaneously, like leaves to a tree, like the romantics used to say? That writing or poetry comes as naturally as leaves to a tree. So do you feel that? Do you get the germ of an idea and then you need to sit down and work on it? Or does it come sort of fully formed in your mind, and when you say it knocks on your door, does it make you restless till you have written it down? And what is the, you say you write it and then you leave it for a while.
Yeah.
So I like to call it the pickling time. Yeah? So you let it settle down, you let it pickle, and then you start working on it again. So when you come back to it, how much of it do you still relate? Or do you think that this is not what it was meant to be? Like you said, you pared it down from 7 stanzas to 1.5 stanzas. So why did that happen? How did it happen?
Yeah, so firstly, I did say that there is a germ of an idea. And the entire poem doesn't come to me, doesn't like leads to a tree. But once the germ is there, it starts developing, and the lines also start developing, the punctuation marks start developing. But I think revision for me is a must, and I do revise on my poems. And like I said, the final form, when I see it, I I have read it so many times already, one word here and there. Why I keep it there, what we call it the pickling time, is because once you take out that poem after 10 days, you suddenly feel it's not, it's not giving the right rhythm. So there has to be a rhythm to a poem. There may not be, so many like rhyming part of it. The rhyming has gone away, but the rhythm has to be modern or contemporary poetry. Just because there is no rhyme does not mean you can just write anything. You have to get that basic rhythm right. You have to get that basic, and for that I also read them out loud. I read out all my poems loud, and then once I get the final perfection, yes, they have undergone some change, and a poem like Holocaust Survivor was pared down to 2.5 stanzas from 7 stanzas. So it's all a part of. You will be surprised what was the original length of the wasteland by T.S. Eliot, and how much was it pared down, not by Eliot himself, but by Ezra Pound. Had Ezra Pound not worked on the wasteland, it would have been a very long, it would have been a disaster. So editing is not only in articles and writers and books, but in poetry also editing plays a very important.
You do get a from readers, like you said. So, has it happened at any point of time, any poem, that there is a reader interpretation which was new to you, and which you felt, I didn't know that this was there in my poem? Has that happened?
It has happened quite a few times, and I think personally I'm not trying to praise myself or something, but I think a poet should feel good if another reader is interpreting it in a different manner. I think that's the hallmark of a good writer, good poem. If it is being developed, if a reader is understanding that poem differently from what the poet meant, I think it's a great thing, and it's happened to me quite a few times. Talking about reader reactions, you've taught literature, Sir has taught literature, I've also taught briefly. We, especially the professors who've been teaching, say someone teaching Eliot for 30 years, he worships Eliot. He knows every bit of it. So, in my earlier poem also, there is a poem called, I would like to send you my earlier edition. It's entitled On Writing a Poem. I have written poems on the craft of writing poetry. So that poem is addressed to, it's called On Writing a Poem with Apologies to T.S. Eliot. Again, I am taking some lines from the wasteland and there. So someone called me from Calcutta. My first book was published in the Writers' Workshop in Calcutta. He picked up, a Writers' Workshop has a small stall at the Calcutta airport. He picked up my book from there. He was probably waiting for his plane, which was late. And then he knew the Writers' Workshop people. From the airport, he rang up the Writers' Workshop. Can you give me this poet's number? So the publisher gave the number, and he rang me from the airport. And he's saying, I'm a professor of English, and I think you are making fun of T.S. Eliot. So I was taken aback. I said, sorry, I don't mean to be, No, you are making fun of Eliot using the ways, you're mocking his lines of wasteland, So I explained to him it's not like that. I mean, even if it is, I've written with apologies to T.S. So you can't say I've written that with apologies. I classified. And then we became friends also, and we keep talking on off and on. But talking about Eliot, I've also dedicated this book to two professors, Professor S. Radhanna, who taught me English in Raipur in Madhya Pradesh. He used to teach us Eliot, and when he started teaching Eliot, each time, when you start teaching an author, you first talk about his lifetime. How was his life? So he was talking about Eliot, that Eliot was, so there was a point when he was saying at the age of 60 plus, he married his secretary who was 22 years old. So there were some girls in the front row sitting, they giggled, And suddenly he got, and he looked at them, he said, are you laughing at T.S. Eliot? He said the full name. Are you laughing at Thomas Stearns Eliot? And the girl became like, he repeated, I'm asking you again, are you laughing at Thomas Stearns Eliot? So the girls got scared, they said, no sir. But then it's alright, because no one laughs at Thomas Stearns Eliot. You know, because they worship, they thought they were making fun of the writer. So the person who rang up to me from Calcutta, yes, you know, how readers interpret my poems differently, there are so many ways. You know, I have written a very, you know, it's a relationship problem poem in my first thing, which is actually and it has been interpreted by a very famous journalist in Delhi as a love poem. It is not a love poem at all. So readers can interpret your poems differently, and I think it's a great sign for a writer whose poems are being interpreted differently from what he meant. To just give you an example, did Shakespeare ever think Hamlet would be discussed from so many angles? You know, hundreds of books have been written on the character of Hamlet, including psychologists, including doctors. They're trying to analyze his character. Did Shakespeare have all these angles in mind?
Talking of Hamlet has also been compared to Arjun. You know, the battlefield. To be or not to be. That indecisiveness. Should I go to battle or should I not? So even that perspective has been brought out by scholars. Now, talking about T.S. Eliot and how you say a lot of professors worship, I must confess that I'm not a great fan of T.S. Eliot.
Okay, so
I find him double tedious, in fact. So this will be taken as heretical, but that's what it is. And one thing that puts me off T.S. Eliot is the number of allusions, the literary allusions that he makes. So you cannot sit with this poem and read it and say, okay, I know what he's talking about. Unless you are sitting with about 50 other reference books around you. So you don't really know what he's talking about or what he really intends to say. Now, that is where I think I liked what you say in your poems, because you do make references to T.S. Eliot, to Sylvia Plath, not exactly to Sylvia Plath in that sense, but you are talking about James Joyce and The Heart Has Its Reasons. That was the title of the very famous autobiography of the Duchess of Windsor. But the thing is that even if you do not know, you can still read this poem. You don't need to know that The Heart Has Its Reasons was a title of a very famous book. Or you don't need to know that Dactylus was a protagonist in James Joyce's work. So even without knowing that, even someone who's not steeped in English literature can read your poems and still find some meaning, which is why I think it appealed to me so much. That I don't, I could relate to them because I've read those writers, but I was also trying to read them from a different perspective and see whether those who have not read James Joyce, for instance, would it make any difference? So maybe a few nuances may be lost, but it wouldn't really matter so much because the poem, as it is, would have some meaning for every reader. So I think you need to be congratulated on that.
Thank you so much.
That you wear your learning lightly, at least the poems wear your learning very lightly. And there was one poem, let me see if I can find that. There are some poems where your language is very poetic, if you get what I mean. The kind of vocabulary that you use. But then suddenly, you bring in a word which could be a little jarring, or which may not seem to be.
On several poems.
No. Just a word here and there. Like for instance, when you say "come home," and I would have your permission to read it out.
Yeah, sure.
This is a poem called "Come Home," addressed to someone, and it begins so beautifully. The first three stanzas Never mind if your syllables are dead. Unload your grief on my shore. Even the voice of God has turned frosty. Why? It can't even exorcise the ghosts that haunt me. The solitude will only grow as the weather grays and the bones whiten. Did you ever know blood too changes its shade? And this is where I have fun. You say, this is the last stanza. Toddle on home to me, girl, before your eyes turn into stone. Now this toddle on, suddenly, it's like you're listening to the Rag Bhopali maybe, and suddenly there is the ma swar, which shouldn't be there. And this high prose, this high poetic tonal quality suddenly seems to be disturbed when you say toddle on. Toddle on.
Yeah, so, there are other poems in my novel which are very simple and straightforward, but there are some which are layered. This is one of those layered love poems, and it's about a girl who I probably met as a very young person. So it's giving, the whole life without her and how's it been. And toddle is actually used for a toddler. The toddler, like, as I said, for the little girl that before your eyes turn into stone, before we both go away from this world, come back once again.
So did you think about this word a lot, or did you just did you edit it?
I did edit it. I did edit it, and I felt it was
appropriate.
It was one may not agree with it, but I felt that was the right word to use. And incidentally, a lot of my friends have liked this poem.
Oh, I'm sure they did, but as a reader,
yeah, but thanks for catching this nuances of
there's another poem. Sylvia Plath was a very famous poet and she committed suicide. And it has mentioned.
Not very clear.
The unwritten verses.
The unwritten verses of Sylvia Plath.
Yeah.
So, would you like to read this out?
Yes.
Please read, and then I'll tell you a little background of this poem.
Okay. Like I said, Sylvia Plath was a very famous poet who committed suicide. And this poem, he has also mentioned that she's a poet and she gasped herself to death. And I like that element of surprise and shock that comes out at the end. Because he talks about how, and it is titled The Unwritten Verses. Obviously, since she died, there was so much that she didn't write. Plath once said, early mornings are a good time to write verses. Before the milkman comes, newspaperman comes, kids wake up. The world is still and largely at peace. The bird songs have just begun. Apparently, Plath also thought that early mornings are a good time to gas oneself to them. Now, this is incomplete, but how the poem begins with the creation of poetry, how early mornings are a good time to start writing, because it's, and the kind of atmosphere that he pictures, it's so serene, it's quiet, there is no newspaperman or a milkman calling out to you. You can only hear the bird songs which have just begun. So it is such a beautifully serene and remarkably creatively conducive atmosphere that he draws. And then suddenly he drops this and he says, early mornings are also a good time to gas oneself today, which is probably what Plath thought. And that struck me, and I think that is one of the hallmarks of a good writer, that they surprise the reader. that you lead them down the garden path, so to say. You lead them down, they go there expecting something, because that is what you've been telling them, that you're going to show them, or what they are seeing on the route. And then suddenly the destination is something different, and something so very, so much at odds with what they have been expecting or anticipating. So you wanted to say something about this. So this is one of the best poems in this.
Yeah, so even in my earlier volume, there's a poem dedicated to Sylvia Plath. It's entitled For Sylvia. And you'll be surprised at the reactions to, I just told you about this request mail that I got. When I put that poem on the Sylvia Plath Facebook pages and on her portal, there was amazing reaction, and a lot of my friends who read my first volume, if I am asked to read only one poem from the first volume, and in this JLF, we did a session in the JLF called the Poetry of Remembrance. The poetry of people who died, and I was asked to read only, there was time to read out only one poem, and I chose to read that poem. So, now remember, this poem is, it goes on to say that how bird songs can become bird shrieks. Now we know that she is suffering from mental illness. She is hugely suffering, Sylvia Plath. And so she has attempted suicide twice earlier. And so she gets up one early morning and she has written in her journals that it was before morning is a good time to try and write because you are not disturbed, the milkman hasn't come, the newspaper man hasn't come, and the bird songs are singing. So that's a kind of thing. But then she's suffering from mental illness. She gets up one morning and she cooks breakfast for her two children. She heats the milk, puts the breakfast and milk on the dining table, and then goes and gasses herself to death. So this poem, Unwritten Verses, is actually denoting that at the age of 30, she commits suicide. And she's one of the biggest proponents of confessional poetry. A lot of my poems, which are very personal, are also confessional in nature. So Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, these were the kind of poets who really impacted me because they were writing about themselves. They were writing about, so this is the point where I felt that, as you rightly said, there is a famous saying, Mr. Mathur must have heard this, that John Keats, someone said, thank God John Keats died at the age of 26. Or else there would have been a special paper on him also by Shakespeare. So, he's died at the age of 30, and what a remarkable amount of work she's left. And just a fortnight ago, the entire collection of unabridged journals of Sylvia Plath have been, they were with her ex-husband, Ted Hughes. They have been finally released to the public. I have already ordered my set. So, when you read her, you see she was writing about her mental illness. So, this was this. You are very true. I have given references to on my whether to James Joyce, Stephen Dedalus, or whether it's Jean-Paul Sartre's theory of existentialism. So I have given little footnotes for people to understand. But I agree with you that even if you read a poem of mine like on S. Dedalus 1 and 2, it does convey. It's good to read when you read it. Actually, one of the poems begins with the word bastard. So, but you get a sense of feeling what these poems are trying to convey. The first one tries to convey that just let me be free so that I can do something creative, like, paint or write or create. That's this first. And then the second is the search for himself, he's trying to find the real Dedalus. So, yeah, true. If you read the work, coming back to what you said about T.S. Eliot, yes, a lot of my poems also have allusions. Some poets do feel that if the reader cannot understand my allusions, it's his problem, not mine. but we give these footnotes that to help the reader understand that. So it makes a poem on unrequited love by William Butler Yeats, Morgon. So people have not heard of Morgon comedy. So Morgon he was the girl or the woman William Butler Yeats was so madly in love with. So that gives you an idea. That is true. And I agree with you, Elliot, what you said about Elliot, that there is so much of reference material you have to check just to read one poem. There is Greek mythology, Chinese mythology, Upanishads, Bible, biblical elements, so many things. You're very true.
Does it have to be something that has happened to you because that anguish or that anger that is then poured out in the form of a poem?
Are you referring to some?
No, when you're talking, like for instance, when you're talking about the COVID-19 situation, because I remember I have written a poem on Sati, which I wrote during the time we had the root cover case, and I didn't know her. There was no personal experience involved, but it moved me and it angered me so much that I could write a poem on that. So has that happened to you? That it feels personal, although it is not?
No, there's a poem on the current, this is a poem which, shows my anger, angst. We will breathe that song. I think it's I don't know if you have this in mind, but it's one of them that shows about the current sectarian divide that we are seeing. And the people are suffering, the public is suffering. A squabbling gaggle of blind men, each shaking a fist at a different part of the elephant. Will the dazzling double-speak alter the quicksilver boot? Perhaps it will. Change, if it can, the secreted edges, the waves of anguish, the collective rage. Meanwhile, we, the fractured, will keep breathing. Just keep breathing.
There are two poems that I'd like to talk about now. One is of methods and numbers. And what I find interesting is we always say that there is a method to someone's madness. And that is how he starts the poem, looking for a method in madness. And then he says, I'm looking at it all the wrong way around. We need to look at the madness in the method. That makes more sense. And I read that poem, I think 4 or 5 times, and each time I read it, it seemed to make more and more sense to me. I seem to find more and more madness to the methods that we see, which we employ every day in our lives actually. And I said, this seems like you're looking at life through the wrong end of the telescope, but it seems to make so much, it has so much more meaning than when you say there's a method to the madness and you say, no, there's a madness in the method. I think most creative people, like inventors, had that madness to their method. That is how they could invent so many things. If Edison did not have the madness in his methods, he would never have invented so many things that we take for granted today. So that was one point that stood out for me because of the way you turned accepted concepts and theories on their head. And the other one was when you talk about existentialism, you talk about John Paul Sartre, and you say that it was, he set us free because he is talking about your choice. He says that human beings have choice. And earlier it was easier because we could blame it all on the gods or on fate, maybe, and say, we can't do anything about it because it is all written in our destiny. But then he came and he condemned us to be free. That's the last line, which I think again brings together two opposites in such a powerful way. You condemn someone to imprisonment. You you're not condemned them to be free, but you're condemned to be free because now you have to take responsibility for all that happens in your life. That you cannot shove the blame onto destiny and the gods. So if something has happened to you, it's because you chose or you selected that path, and so you're condemned. You're free, but you're condemned to be free. So I thought that was another very meaningful and a very powerful poem that really stood out for me in a very distinctive way. And then there's the sky fall. He said the sky falls. Now, what kind of a catastrophe do you imagine in that? You say the sky falls, but you have to read that out.
Yeah. So I will just first touch on the two poems that you mentioned about better than madness. You very rightly say that we're talking about better than madness. It's actually you have to find a madness. It's the opposite way. So in my earlier volume, there was a similar companion poem called Topsy Turvy. There were imagine, there's a very famous poem called The Bat. The Bat turns upside down. So in that poem I've written that I would like to become a bat and turn myself upside down. Like a bat hangs itself upside down. And when I hung myself upside down, I suddenly understood everything. All the pieces of the jigsaw fell in their places. So that's a similar kind of thing. It's the opposite that brings in mind. See, for condemned to be free, I will confess, has been written by a number of critics for Jean-Paul Sartre. It is not my line exactly. But when you're reading critical essays on Shakespeare, Sartre, so someone did say that he has condemned us to be free, and I thought that was a good phrase which I could put in my poem. And it was very easy now. The Christians have the divine plan, where the God has decided this is the big game. उसके साथ ये कर दो, उसके एक्सीडेंट में मार दो, उसको कैंसर कर दो, इसको ये कर दो. He's watching the divine plan. So which comes to my, the title of this particular poem, where I say gods don't matter. If you are around, then why don't you do something? It can be contradictory also. So Jean-Paul Sartre told us that, firstly he told us that this is a meaningless and absurd word. We can't really make meaning of it. And he said there is no point, there is no such thing as a divine plan. I've written that divine plan is bunkum. And each one of us, we are here by ourselves. We have to make our decisions, we have to choose. And when we choose, we have to suffer. Because this is what Eliot also said. When we choose something, we have to suffer. And we have to suffer, and we have to suffer again. And so it's like a cycle. And that's why I said that you have condemned us to be free, meaning that it's actually by becoming free, we are actually prisoners. Because the choice is now up to us. I can't say that Bhagwan ki marzi thi, that there is I'm taking fruits, good or bad.
I think we can round up this conversation with something again which most of us can relate to, I think. When he says that pain is the constant, it's a staple. And he says I've grown used to it. And I was immediately reminded of a Hindi film song which says Sukh hai ek chhaad dhatti aati hai jati hai, dukh to apna saathi hai. So I thought that is, pain is something that stays with us. Whether it is at the moment, whether it is in memory, but it's there always. And like the poet said, the sweetest songs tell of saddest thought. So even in our memories, even when we are thinking of the happy memories, there is still a tinge of sadness, of nostalgia. The sadness is there because we were happy at one point in time. That is gone, that moment is gone. So pain will always be a part of our lives. And I think you have come to accept it. And you say you should wear it like a badge. Be proud of the pain, be happy, because pain teaches you a lot of things as well. And unless you know pain, you cannot know pleasure. Unless you have pain, you do not know what it is. So unless you have these two opposites, we need to be able to accept them both and to say that this is and will always be a part of our lives. So let us get on with our lives and let us try to see where our heart can find its reasons to rejoice and to spread love. Yeah?
And you just quoted what Mr. Mathur had also quoted in Sherry's lines, the sweetest songs are of sorrow.
The sweetest songs instead of sadness.
Instead of sadness. Yeah. So that is true, and because in many ways, in different ways, for me, I've said that writing poetry has been cathartic for me, it has been therapeutic for me, and when I've written about my pain, I feel better. And once a poem is complete, nothing gives me more pleasure. And yes, there were different. You mentioned a poem called Skyfall. It was like, again, it's a love poem. I always quote Pritish Nandi, the famous critic and poet, English poet, who died only recently, that when he was editing a love poetry magazine, he first wrote that love poetry begins with heartbreak. You don't write in love poetry, contemporary love poetry in English, you're not writing uski aankhein bahut achhi hain, uski zulfen bahut achhi hain. But the heartbreak will bring out the real. You see William Butler Yeats, how much he's suffering for Morton, and what kind of poetry Morton inspires him to write. Because he suffered in pain, he was able to write such a thing. And ma'am, I would like to tell you one thing, that this book has had something like 7-8 book sessions. Your questions have been most different. Please compliment me.
Very brief chat on the phone. He said, what kind of questions, how do we plan this? So I said, I generally don't script questions because I like it to go organically. And I said, I promise I will not throw any googlies at you. I hope I haven't done that. So I thought it makes it more interesting because if I have a set of scripted questions and no matter what he says, I go on to the next question, it's very scripted and artificial. So I enjoyed this session very much. Thank you so much. As much as I enjoyed reading the poems and trying to fathom the intensity of meaning and emotion that lies behind, like I said, the brevity of the poems belies the intensity that they hold. So it was a pleasure reading them, a pleasure talking to you, and a pleasure being here with all of you. And I think it's now time for an interaction with the audience.
Is there any questions?
Good evening, sir. I have a question. Do you restrict your thoughts while you are writing a poem, or do you just let it all go when you are thinking of the poem?
So, while writing, we don't restrict thoughts, but like I said, editing and revision is a very important part. You can't just write and say, this is done. It has to be revised. That students asking so many questions. It's another one.
Good evening, sir. Could you tell us something about your upcoming works?
So you'll be happy to know that I am also working on a fun book about Myo. Because the reminiscences, I haven't given the title, but they are about reminiscences of my school time, about almost 8 years that I spent there in the school. And they are funny anecdotes about what all happened in school. That is one. Another is a novella which I spent 3 years in Indonesia. It's a Jakartan love story. It's it's almost there. It's going to get published in Indonesia.
Thanks.
Good evening, sir. I wanted to ask that how did you start your career in poetry? What thoughts did your mind?
So, I don't know how to tell the students, my first poem was a heartbreak poem in college. And I fell in love with a classmate, but she was loving someone else, so it became like a Hollywood story. So, my first poem had to add insult to injury. She was a good friend of mine, and I just started liking her. I thought I would tell her I like her. But just one day before probably I told her, she came and said, guys, can you help me? I know my best friend. I said, how? Well, I like that guy. And he's been sending me messages, and can you be our mediator? You know? So that was adding insult into it. So I went through a trying time and I wrote that poem. Most of my poems in the first volume, I would like to tell you, are published poems. Published in Illustrated Weekly, Femina, New Times, Imprint, Sun, Jazz. So it was not that the poetry editors were on the level of Sir Nisim Sekal, Shiv K. Kumar, Pritesh Nandi, Kamla Das. So all these poets were selecting your poems. So that was many of them got rejected also, not all of them got published. But the published ones are, so that gave me a great satisfaction. So first one was love, but that's how I started.
But actually, in this generation's lingo, he got friend zoned. That's why he started writing that first.
I'm not going to ask a question. So I just want to say a couple of words. First of all, thank you very much for honoring me and the other lady, the lady. I'm very grateful to you for that. Well, I want to say that when I read this book, I was a bit surprised because knowing you, Jack, as you are a soul, a gentle soul with quiet and peace, I couldn't believe that inside you there is a whole volcano, passion and anger and thought, which we don't get to see when we are interacting with you. So that was a revelation, and you've done it beautifully, and I'm a fan of yours, of course, and I hope you continue writing. He lives at two different levels, I think. He thinks in a certain way which he shares to his poems, but in your real life, you're sweet, you always offer a drink when you come, when we go. So keep it up, and I really appreciate what you're doing, and more power to your arm.
Thank you so much, sir. It's a great honor to be my inspiration. And it was a great pleasure to dedicate my anthology.
Thank you for this nuanced, riveting, and poetic conversation. I would like to invite Mr. Devendra Nawad, the General Manager of Pratap Mahal, to please present mementos to the author and the conversations. Gratitude to each one of you for taking time out today for the session. The Right Circle is grateful to the hospitality partner Hotel Pratap Mahal and to the associates Ehsaas, Ajmer and UK. You could grab the copies of the book When Gods Don't Matter. The author is here for signing in case any of you would like to get it signed. Thank you.